Welcome everyone joining us live and by recorded video to this month's Let's Talk Solutions focusing on scholarships. Today we'll be covering the overview within the scholarship module, using common applications for multiple funds, scholarship fund basics and keys for success, designing and planning scholarship web applications, and a deep dive into application questions. And then we'll have some time for Q&A as well. So I am Amy Strom, your Director of Client Success, and today you'll be hearing from Jeff Armstrong, our Chief Innovation Officer, who will be leading today's training. A couple of housekeeping items. We will be recording today's presentation, and you'll be able to find this and all previous recordings on NPAC's knowledge base. If you have any questions during the presentation, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will be monitoring your questions, and we'll make some time at the end to discuss them. We'll also make some time in the middle, hopefully, to review those. With that, I'd like to hand this over to Jeff Armstrong. Take it away, Jeff.
All right, thanks, folks, and good morning. Welcome. Today we're going to be talking about the scholarship module in Foundation Cloud Grants and in our community portal. And we're going to start out here by talking just a little bit about the scholarship life cycle. It's a long process, typically involving several months of work for the foundation. It starts with preparing and releasing that application online. A lot of preparing needs to go into it, design, etc. Once that application is online, obviously you're doing a lot of support with your applicants. If they've got references, you're monitoring those references that come in. If they've got, supplemental pages, etc., then you'll be monitoring that as well. Once the applications are submitted and you're ready to start your review process, it may be a cyclical application where there's a deadline and you start reviewing afterwards. It may be an open-ended application where you review, on a regular cadence, maybe monthly reviewing those applications that come in, etc. But there's a review process that can involve scoring in our community portal with review committee members logging in to score the applications. There can be automated scoring that's configured in Foundation Cloud Grants, or it can just be a manual process of looking at the applications and deciding which ones to award and which ones to decline. Once you've made those decisions on which applications are going to get advanced and paid, then you'll do your award management. That involves record processing in Foundation Cloud Grants. You'll take your scholarship web applications and create scholarship application records from them and use workflow to create grants and batch them up in a check. It will also involve, communicating with those recipients. Congratulations, you've received a scholarship. We'll be paying it out in the next month or so. And then finally, afterwards, analyzing and reporting. This may include some follow-up questions. A lot of times, if you're going to do a two-payment grant award, you may want to, get them to come back and upload a transcript and fill out some additional information as a supplemental page in our portal. And that way you can go in and validate that they're still eligible for the scholarship fund. They're still meeting that criteria, and that you can make their spring scholarship payment for them. So the full life cycle, it often involves, many months of work, but it succeeds. Your best results are going to be spending a lot of time in that preparing and releasing phase. And that's what we're going to be talking about a bit here. So all these things are managed in different areas of Foundation Cloud. And so it can be a little bit daunting, but I just wanted to simplify things here. Feel free to take screenshots of these, by the way, if you want to take a screenshot. But Foundation Cloud Grants has several tools here, and then there are a few tools in the portal as well. So let's go through these. The online apps screen in Foundation Cloud Grant is where we create and configure these online applications. Within those applications that are created, those application, records, placeholders, or whatever within those, that's where you configure, things like, is this open-ended or cyclical? Is this going to be a password-protected application? Is it online today, etc.? You can also have access to all the pages of questions that are on this application, and you get access to the next item here, the application fields page, where you can go in and add fields, remove fields, reorder them, set the prompts for them, etc. For each page, you also have a layout editor for creating and updating these application forms. It's not intimidating. Don't be intimidated by it. It is an HTML editor, and you can get really complex if you want to. you can go in and view the raw markup if you're so inclined, but most folks aren't doing that. So our layout editor is a really easy to use WYSIWYG editor for creating the application forms that go online into the portal for your applicants. And then finally, we'll talk quite a bit about this today. The scholarship fund screen in Foundation Cloud is where your fund holders will, is where your scholarship funds are configured with a couple of important things here. There's fund criteria. If you're going to do fund matching, you can say that this particular scholarship fund is for female applicants who are engineering majors or things along those lines. And then processing defaults. Whenever I get a scholarship fund and I'm going to create a grant from it via workflow, what do I want the grant type to be? What do I want the designation on that grant to be, et cetera. So there's configuration for each scholarship fund individually. So those are all the relevant tools there in Foundation Cloud Grants. In the portal, we've got obviously the scholarship applicant portal for students to come in and apply for their scholarship applications. They can submit their applications there. They can also see the status of any outstanding reviews from from a coach or from a guidance counselor, the sort of reviews that go into there. They can view those statuses and send those requests out again if they didn't get sent. The reviewer portal is an optional part of the whole deal here, where review committee members can log in and score applications if you want to open that up to your committee members. And then finally, the portal has an application admin portal for helping to manage those references in those supplemental pages as well. You can send out reminders, emails to all your applicants who haven't submitted their supplementals yet, that sort of thing. So lots of different parts there and lots of different systems, but we'll be walking through several of these today. So one of the things that we're going to be talking about quite a bit today is doing the common scholarship application that does fund matching, or doing fund-specific applications. We've got a lot of foundations. A lot of you do a common application and have set it up for matching. And several of you have fund-specific applications as well, where this one specific scholarship fund has some very detailed questions that need to be asked of the applicants. And there are quite a few folks actually who have a hybrid. They've got a common application and they've got one or two special fund-specific apps that they've done for really unique scholarship fund holders. And so there are advantages and disadvantages to each. So we'll talk through some of these pros and cons real quickly here. When you do a common app for matching, you only have to build one application. If you're going to do fund specific, it's a lot more work to set those up and maintain them in Foundation Cloud. It requires multiple applications. If you do a common application, you've got the flexibility of either allowing your applicants to select the funds to which they are matched, based on their eligibility criteria that they filled out in the application. You've also got the option to do a common application and do that matching yourself in the back end on Foundation Cloud. And we'll walk through that later today whenever I share my screen and walk through the product. So quite a bit of flexibility there on either putting the power in the hands of the applicants or in the hands of your scholarship administration staff. If you do fund-specific applications, you don't have to worry about fund matching at all, whether it's applicant matching or foundation matching. They're immediately linked to the appropriate fund for faster processing. If you have questions that are very specific to a particular scholarship fund, if you're doing a common application, you can do what we call addendum pages, where if you've got extra questions, if an applicant selects that they want to apply to a fund that requires an additional page of questions, then they'll be directed to that page to fill out those additional questions, and we'll demo that in just a second as well. In a fund-specific application, you don't have to do addendum questions because every application is already fund-specific, right? Common applications require configuration of scholarship fund criteria. That example I gave earlier of a particular scholarship fund being just for female applicants who are engineering majors or whatever. If you've got a lot of scholarship funds and you need to configure those, that can be a lot of work in the beginning. It can be high maintenance if those criteria change. So it is a bit more work on the foundation side. For fund-specific applications, that criteria gets validated during the review process, right? You take a look at an application and say, okay, is this a female applicant? And is she going to be an engineering major or whatever? You'll have to do that as part of the processing of that particular fund. And then finally, grouping. As applications get submitted from your applicants, they get grouped internally to application review groups for processing. Those are used to assign to committees or for batch processing, etc. With a common application, you can configure those for automatic grouping. And so you can put all of your athletic scholarships into one group and all of your, whatever sort of groups you need. You can configure those for automatic grouping. But for fund-specific applications, you don't have to mess with that. You don't need fund-specific grouping. They just all come in essentially to one application review group for your processing needs. So in thinking about what you want to do, you're going to want to make sure that you know ahead of time how much work it's going to be in Foundation Cloud, regardless of which of these you choose, and plan accordingly. So
There's
let's talk a
one
little
quick
bit.
question
Yeah, go ahead.
about can a fund-specific application be duplicated if they only need to make a minor change for each specific application?
Yes, that's not part of what I was planning on showing today, but I'd be more than happy to show that whenever we look at a web application record in Foundation Cloud Grants. You can copy a web application. You can, and as you do so, you can choose to copy the existing pages or reuse the existing pages, your choice, or to omit certain pages if you need to. So a lot of flexibility in how you do those things. And I know we've got some documentation somewhere on best practices for those things. Why would you want to copy versus reuse an existing page, et cetera? So we can talk through some of that whenever I get into the demo, but great question.
Thank
So
you.
let's talk a bit more about scholarship funds. Talked a little bit about this already, but a scholarship fund is different than a regular fund, a general fund record. Every scholarship fund record is linked back to a parent fund. But I could have a fund, I could have the Jeff Armstrong Fund, and from that I could create, 3 separate scholarship funds, one for an academic, one for an athletic scholarship, one for merit scholars, whatever. But a scholarship fund is not the same thing as a general fund. Every scholarship fund has to have their own separate processing defaults. So whenever I'm going to take a scholarship application for a particular scholarship fund, what do I want its grant type to be? What do I want its grant workflow template to be? Its check designation, etc. These all get set up per scholarship fund. Every scholarship fund also has its own set of criteria, right? And so that can be high maintenance if you need to do matching, but once it's all set up, it's incredibly powerful for your applicants. I didn't mention it here, but it's also worth noting that you can turn on and turn off particular funds per year if you want to. So if a particular scholarship fund holder decided for whatever reason not to fund scholarships this year, you can turn them off temporarily so that they don't come back in the matching results, not available to students this year. And then next year, if the fund holder decides to fund their scholarship again, you can just turn it right back on. And so those are set on a year-by-year basis. And then finally, each scholarship fund can have an addendum page for additional application questions. This has to occur before you put the application online, right? Classic example of this that we did for one of our first customers that did this going back, 10 or 12 years ago. We had a foundation who had a scholarship fund that was for the children of firefighters in their community, right? And so if you said yes, that you wanted to apply, if you matched to that one, then you were taken to an addendum page where you had to fill out additional information, which parent was the firefighter, which department did they work in, all those sorts of firefighter specific questions that wouldn't have made sense to anyone else on a common application. So if you're going to do a common application and you need very specific questions to a fund, then you can set up addendum pages for that. So that's funds at a high level. We'll walk through the screens and show how it all works. And we'll also talk about configuring the funds for matching. So here it is sort of at a high level. You create a scholarship fund. On that fund record, you set up the criteria for eligibility for applicants. When you've set up your common application, you map the fields in that application back to the appropriate questions, the appropriate criteria fields that are on that scholarship fund, right? So, for example, if you say that a scholarship fund, students are only eligible for this fund if their GPA is greater than 3.5, you have to ask a GPA question in the application, right? And if you called it something different than GPA, then you'll have to note that whenever you do your mapping, and we'll step through that whenever we jump into the demo. If you need to create an addendum page, you need to do that early on before you take the application live. And we'll show how and where to create those addendum pages. And then, of course, in the fund configuration, you'll have to link the addendum to that fund so that the portal knows to send those questions to the applicant. So it looks a bit complex, but we'll step through it and demystify it here as we jump into the screens. Were there, Amy, were there any other questions that came up around funds? I want to talk a little bit about planning, give a little bit of a teaser for next time.
Nothing in there in our Q&A right now.
Okay, feel free to keep those questions coming. I hope that a picture is going to be worth 1,000 words, and we'll be able to answer some questions preemptively as we go through the screens. So we're going to talk here a bit about planning web apps and making some of these important design decisions. Just a little bit of a teaser. In 2 months, our Let's Talk Solutions for Foundation Cloud in March is going to be one where we're going to have one of our staff experts on scholarship funds and funds in general, for that matter, applications online. Catherine was a professional grant writer before she joined our team, and so she did a lot of grant writing for other organizations, and she knows what questions frustrated her and what questions were great questions. And so it'll be sort of an Ask Me Anything format. We're really looking forward to that. So without trying to steal too much of her thunder, these are some of the planning questions that we're going to need to address before we actually start developing our application and putting it online. So the first one we've discussed already, do you want your applicants to do fund matching, or do you want the foundation to do fund matching, your staff? And that'll sort of drive some of the configuration you'll need to do in the web application in Foundation Cloud Grants. Are you going to do a single stage or a multi-stage application? We have some foundations who will just do a handful of preliminary questions. And if you don't meet the basic criteria, we're not even going to invite you back to be a semi-finalist or a finalist for the next stage of questions. So do you want to do a 2-stage process, which can help whittle down the number of applications to review, but it can be a lot more work to set up. So that's sort of a design decision you'll need to make. Is this going to be an open-ended application, or is it going to be cyclical? For most scholarship applications, they're cyclical. But if it's open-ended, you can turn it on and turn it off as you see fit, but there's no hard and fast deadline per se that's configured into the system. So you'll need to figure out what pages you want to present to your applicants. We think a good scholarship application has 4 to 5 pages in it. If you do any more than that, it can be a bit daunting. But what we often see is, sort of demographic questions, academic questions, financial, maybe athletic if it's, an athletic scholarship, etc. But how do you want to group your questions into pages? And then some decisions to make about the specific questions you're asking your applicants. So for essay questions, do you want to do long text fields and let them type into the portal? Or paste things in, or do you want to do file attachments and let them upload Word documents and PDFs for their essay questions? Which fields are going to require a drop-down list of options? If you're going to give them, what's your field of study? Do you want to give them a drop-down of all the various, options for a college major? If so, you're going to have to go into your characteristics in foundations and in Foundation Cloud Grants and get those all set up properly. Do a little bit of early planning there. Will there be any conditional fields? And I'll show an example of that whenever I share screen here. If so, which fields are they going to be dependent on? If I answer yes to question A, then am I going to be presented with question B, and just plan those appropriately? And then finally, will specific fields need to be scored? Just thinking ahead to scoring and to reviewing. And if so, if it's going to be done either by reviewers or automatically by Foundation Cloud, then we're going to want to do some of that review scoring configuration as a part of the application setup. So these are just some things to keep in mind as you're doing your application planning before you start creating your application and testing it out. So all right, I think that's enough slides. Let's jump in and show screens. I'm going to take over screen share. Bear with me just a moment while I close a couple of things down. Share screen. All right, Amy, I've shared my Foundation Cloud, my browser here. Is this visible?
This is. Thank you.
You bet. Before I actually jump into demo, I want to talk a little bit about a couple of great resources. There'll be a slide with this later, and I'm sure Jess will email these out to you. But we have a grant application form planning knowledge base article on Document 360. And it's just got some great content on successful planning strategies. There's even a page you can download for a template for planning your application in Word, decisions you need to make, field data types, etc. So great resource there. And then another great resource here for creating web applications. This is a white paper we published about a year ago, and it's got great documentation here. It's an 18-page PDF. You can download this. It's got some great content here around some of what I've summarized already in these slides, but some great content available for your perusal later. So we're going to start out by jumping into Foundation Cloud Foundation Cloud Community Portal. This is one of our sandbox environments, and I've logged in with the user who's got all sorts of rights. So my apologies if this is a little bit overwhelming here, but today we're going to be very much concerned with the scholarship applicant experience. And we have talked about scholarship fund matching. And so what we want to do is look at what that experience is like for the applicant. And so I'm going to go into my saved applications in this demo environment and find one that is still in a created status and hasn't yet been submitted. So this is our matching scholarship application. We can open this one up and take a look at it in the design back in Foundation Cloud Grants. But this is the applicant experience. You can put additional instructions up here. We have some foundations who do a whole page of instructions before any of the questions come up down here as tab 1. So you can do it that way if you like. Part of the text you put up here in instructions can also be a link to download a PDF if you've got one, maybe on your website. You can have folks download a PDF with instructions if you need to do that. Here are just some sample application questions we've got. We've got some that are drop downs. We've got some that are numeric, some that are formatted specifically for phones and for US zip codes, etc. So short text, we've got some long text. You'll notice some of them are required, some of them are not. The little red asterisk says they're required. You can configure tooltips in Foundation Cloud for each of these fields. And so I can click here and just sort of get more information on what this field is about and what I'm supposed to do as I enter that. We've got some numeric fields here. We've got a date picker if you want to do a date picker tool. These are some of the eligibility questions that are going to be used in matching. You'll notice that there's all sorts of things here that seem to be driving us towards which applications we're going to be able to apply to. And then there's an essay here. This one is an open text. You could also do a file attachment here as well if you wanted to. Once they've filled all this out, done all the required fields, our typical process is to have a submit button here, but this one is a matching scholarship application. And so with this comment app, we're just going to say match to funds. And this is going to say, the following scholarship funds are available based on the criteria you specified in your application. Please select the funds to which you wish to apply. You can, of course, customize this to whatever verbiage you want in your portal. You can put a limit on it. You can say you are eligible for 12 funds, but you can only choose up to 3 that you want to apply to or whatever. So you can set that threshold in Foundation Cloud Grants. Some funds may require additional information. These are those addendum pages we were talking about. I'm going to pick a couple of these. Yeah, that's what the asterisk means, is that these are going to require some additional information. So I'll go ahead and say that I want to apply to these 3, and I'll submit. And so something interesting happens here. We've got 2 applications. 3 applications created. 2 of them still have addendums that need to be completed, right? No, I was mistaken. It looks like this one already went through. So this one did not have an addendum. But this one did. So this has an addendum that still has to be filled out. I can go back to the application and see what is this Greeley addendum. I wanted to apply to this Greeley grant. And, well, brilliant. Looks like in our sample environment, I don't have the follow-up questions, but there could be follow-up questions here that they could fill out and then resubmit. And so that is essentially the applicant experience. They've got the ability to go in and see if they filled out any reference fields. They can go out and see who if their references have submitted their references. You have no reference requests, so nothing to see here, but they can see, yes, my coach did fill out my reference. They can't see the details of what the coach said. or they can see that the email was sent to the coach, but the coach hasn't yet filled it out, etc. And then they'll have a button where they could, send the coach another email directly from here. So that's the applicant experience for a scholarship matching application. Any questions on this before I jump into Foundation Cloud grants?
There was just one question about addendums. Does the addendum functionality replace branching questions within a common application?
It can. So it's really up to the foundation how you want to set those up. We'll get into an example of one that I've got set up that I don't think is published yet, but you can say, you could have a field on the common application that's branching that says, is one of your parents, is or was one of your parents a firefighter, for example? And if you say yes, you can have a few additional conditional fields show up, right? And you can fill those out there. You can do that as part of the common application. That would certainly simplify the application process for the student. And that way they wouldn't have to go to an addendum page to fill those things out. So if you have a lot of those, it might make sense to consider an addendum strategy rather than, a nested conditional field strategy within your common application. But if you've just got a few, then yeah, you can avoid addendums completely and just set them right up in your common app. Great question.
That's the only one we have right now.
Okay, great. And let's jump into Foundation Cloud grants. I want to start by talking about scholarship fund matching. So not sure if you folks are using this tool or not, but in this common application that we just showed in the portal, the applicants were presented with the funds to which they matched based on their criteria, and they had the power to choose. Another business paradigm you could choose to go after is not to put that power into the hands of your applicants, but instead put that power into the hands of your scholarship management team. And so if you choose to do that, you can use this scholarship matching screen. This will allow you to match a scholarship fund to all of the applications to which this fund criteria makes sense. So let's go choose a fund. Here we go, the 1007 Inman Family Scholarship. If we were to just choose this fund, then we've got a bunch of applications, per fiscal year that are available for matching. So these are all the applications that meet the criteria configured on this fund. And that criteria is military equals yes, right? And so that criteria is met for all these funds. All these funds also don't yet have a scholarship fund assigned, right? So if one's already got a fund, we're not going to bother matching to it. We're just going to show you all the ones that are not yet matched. So this is a powerful tool if your staff wants to do the matching themselves per fund. And of course, you can also, just get to all the applications and export them and do them through spreadsheets if you need to, but we just think this is a good tool for that. Let's take a look at this scholarship fund record itself. We talked quite a bit in the slides about a scholarship fund record. You'll notice that this Inman Family Scholarship fund is tied back to a regular fund, a standard fund in Foundation Cloud grants, right? So this is a scholarship endowment fund. And again, this fund could have multiple scholarship funds, and we're just looking at this one right now, the Inman Family Scholarship. We can see its available funds, et cetera, all sorts of details here on it, whether it's active, et cetera. A couple of interesting things to note here. There are academic years that we can define. Some folks are entering a new academic year every year in Foundation Cloud grants. They're setting up a 2021, 2022, 2023, et cetera, or even giving them school year names rather than just, simple 4-digit names. But you can define these fiscal periods and manage the total award amounted per year, all sorts of other fields on a year-by-year basis. It allows you to track more, but it's certainly not necessary. We have most of our foundations, I think, are just using this default fiscal period, which is just reused year after year. You don't have to go in and do all that high maintenance work of maintaining those year after year. So we could say on the default year, and this is what our system is currently using as the default year, do we want to display this scholarship fund on the web for matching right now? And so if we wanted to turn it off for this year, if Inman Family Fund decided not to fund scholarships, we could just turn it off. And if I were to save that, it would take it off of the portal for matching purposes this year. I'm going to cancel this and leave that one in place. This is where we configure the defaults whenever we decide to make an award for a scholarship application that is a student who's applied to this particular fund. If we're going to create a grant record for this through workflow, then what is that grant going to look like? Its grant type is going to be one of our scholarship grant types. Its workflow template is going to be one of these scholarship templates. The check designation is going to be one of our predefined check designations. And if it's got an addendum, this is where we set it as well. It's got that Inmen addendum. And so these are things that we typically configure on the grant records themselves. This just allows us to set some defaults for grant processing to automatically handle these things as we go in and create the grants. So those are the academic years and the defaults. This is where we set the fund criteria. You know, for each criteria line, you can have open parentheses and closed parentheses to make them relatively complicated if you want. This is a really simple example that just says the logical criteria is military equals yes. But you could say, you know, we've got some complex ones where we say if they're going to one of these 3 high schools and they're going to be an out-of-state student, then yes, we want to make them eligible for this, but only if, you know, they are whatever African American applicants, in which case, you know, you can do all sorts of complex grouping and conditional criteria. These can be relatively complicated. We do have a tool in our I can't remember if it's data tools or if it's in system. There is a tool somewhere in here that lets you validate whether all your fund criteria has been configured correctly. And whether you're actually going to get any applicants matching based on the criteria that you've set up. So there is a tool for helping with that. And so that at a high level is how we're configuring our fund, scholarship fund records. And again, if you've got, you know, 50 scholarship funds that you're going to be configuring the criteria for, this initial task can be a bit overwhelming to set it all up. But once it's done, it just allows incredible processing in the portal. So before I jump over to web apps, Amy, any questions here on scholarship funds?
Nope, we can move forward.
All right, so online apps. This is where we set up these online applications. So this is a list of all the 43 web applications that have ever been created in this sandbox environment. You can see some of them are not accepting applications at this time. Maybe they were cyclical and their expiration, sorry, their end date has passed and they're no longer accepting applications. Maybe they're brand new and the application hasn't opened yet, or maybe they're not cyclical and they're open-ended and they've just been turned off temporarily. So we can see how many submissions have come in per online application. I'm going to sort these, change the sort, and just jump toward the end here. We've got one set up here, this New Mexico app sample. I'm going to bring this one up just to talk through what this web app looks like. There are a lot of settings here that sort of drive the functionality and the processing. We talked through some of these in the slides, but when an application gets submitted by your applicants, do you want to automatically create that scholarship application record in the scholarship module in Foundation Cloud Grants, or do you want to wait until later and only create those for those that you decide to move forward with? Is this going to have a default fund? So this is where if you're not doing a common app, but you're doing a fund-specific app, this is where you would say, yes, all applications that come into this this particular application, all submissions that come in are going to be automatically assigned to the, you know, the Greeley Fund that we were looking at before, or the Inman Family Scholarship Fund. So you could set that default fund. The cycle type is going to either be open-ended or cyclical, and if it's cyclical, you can set start date and end dates. And then you can flag here whether it's currently accepting applications. That's only relevant if you're looking at an open-ended application. If it's cyclical, then it's going to be driven by the dates, right? So you can have a stage 1 and a stage 2 if you're going to do a multi-stage. If you're just doing a single stage, you'll ignore stage 2 and just do stage 1 for your start and your end dates. And then there's also a submit status here for the cyclical applications. We have some foundations who want the applicant experience to be such that once you click submit, it's done and you can't go back. We have a few foundations actually who want their application submit process to be such that they commit their submissions, but they can come back and modify their applications until the deadline comes into place. So that's relatively helpful on a scholarship application if a student is going to get an updated transcript or report card, and they want to be able to come back in and make one last minute tweak the week before the deadline. They can come in if their submit status had been set to committed. They'll be able to come back and do that until the application closes, at which point you'll lock the scoring round, and that will take everything that's committed and make it submitted and basically read only on the web for the applicants. For the web settings, lots of options here as well. What are we going to display the title of this application to be for the applicants to see? Is it going to be password protected? This would be for a by invitation only application. Do we want to list it online? If it's going to be a private application, then we may not want to list it online. This is an important one. Do we want applicants to be able to submit multiple applications or not? For a scholarship fund matching application, for a common application, we do recommend, and we've got some foundations who do it either way, but if you don't allow multiple applications, then it will allow that fund matching, and you can match to 5 funds and choose those 5 funds, and it will create those 5, but you can't come back and fill out another application and match to 2 different ones and make it 7, right? So that's entirely up to the foundation, how y'all want to configure that. Is this going to use fund matching or not? And that'll sort of drive whether they get that match button or whether they get the submit button on the last page of the application. Featured, this will determine whether or not, I'm going to switch back to the portal real quickly. Whenever I go to the landing page, the dashboard here for a scholarship applicant, there are featured applications, and so there are a bunch of applications. But if I just want to feature a few of them, a few of the top ones, I can make it featured and appear in this list, and that's what this checkbox is for. And then finally, a submit email CC. If you want to get an automatic notification for one of your staff members that someone has submitted an application, the applicants get an email immediately to whatever email address they've specified during registration on the portal saying, thank you for submitting your app. If you want that email to also go to a staff member at your foundation, you can set that here as well. So lots of configuration options, lots to think through. Again, they're documented in these 2 knowledge base articles, a lot more information there. And this is where we set up the pages. So this is a 4-page application. You'll notice all 4 of the pages are standard. For a multi-stage application, we would have a couple of preliminary pages followed by some standard pages, right? There can also be supplemental pages if you want an awardee to come back and fill out more information after they've received their grant. And then there can be addendum pages in here as well. And so we do recommend ordering them, not 1, 2, 3, 4, because if you have to go in and change the order, you don't want to have to go back in and reorder one of them. I chose to put this one at the very top, and I didn't have to reorder because it went 10, 20, 30. So I get to just call it number 5 and put it in there right at the top. Simplified things a bit. So within each page, we can go do the field editor that we talked about that lists all the fields that are on each page. And then the layout is the form builder, which is where you set up, what that applicant experience is going to look like and how you're going to phrase your questions, etc. And we'll jump into this layout in just a second. But there was a question earlier about copying an application or reusing an application. There is a function here at the top here to copy this application. And so if this was a cyclical application and its time has come and gone and it's now closed, if I want to do this again next year, I could copy this application. And it's going to give me a lot of options here. What do I want the new name to be? And so I'd probably just get rid of the copy of business and just put a new year at the end of it. This is the 2024 version or whatever. For each page that's on this current application, then I get to choose what I want to happen in the new application that I'm copying. Do I want to copy this page? Do I want to reuse this page, or do I want to omit it completely? And I'll briefly discuss these. The copy function, the reuse function will take the markup, the look and feel of the application page and everything, and bring it over and use the exact same layout that was used last year. It'll use the exact same fields that were used last year. And this option makes a lot of sense if you are not going to change anything on this page. If you do need to change a question or two, then we strongly recommend that you copy instead of reuse. And the reason for that is if you delete a question, then last year's applicants can log back in and see the application, and they would no longer have the field, one of the fields that they have already submitted, and they'd get an error in the portal that they're missing a field. And so if the structure of the application, if the questions are going to change, then we definitely recommend that you copy. If it's going to be exactly the same, even if you're going to change the verbiage or the prompts just a little bit, that's okay. But if the fields themselves, like the data types, are going to be changed or removed, then you definitely ought to copy instead of reuse. And so for each page, you'd want to give it a new name, etc. And then once you hit save, it'll create the new one and take you to that page. So that's how you copy an application. A couple more cool features up here. We've got the preview application, and this will just show you what the applicant experience is going to be and let you play with what the fields are going to look like. In this one, I've got a conditional question, and we'll go in and show how that's been set up in just a minute. And we've got sample financials. These are calculated fields. We'll talk about that as well. But if I were to put in, the college, 50,000, my parents are going to chip in 10,000, and then I've also got 25,000 in financial aid. It's going to automatically calculate my total required as being 15,000. And we'll show you how we set up these individual fields to do that. It's pretty straightforward. So this is a cool little preview there. And then finally, add to the query screen. The query function, we're not going to dive into that today, but the query function in Foundation Cloud Grants will let you, pull data out for applications and also for reviews. Just because of the structure of how we're storing this data, it's unique per application. And so this will just automatically add it as one of the table options in the query screen for you to go in and query on after the fact. Once you've got all your applications submitted, you can go build a query real easily to get all that data out. And then you can export that to Excel if you need to, etc. So, let's talk just a bit about the editor here. We've got. Let's look at the sample criteria. We're going to go to the layout. And this is where we've got all these fields laid out. If I don't like the way they look, no problem. I can just go in here and regenerate the form. And just with a simple click here, it just wiped out everything that was there and just replaced it with the fields as they're already defined in the order that they're already defined in with the default prompts. There's this little button here to validate the page. It's also available here, but if I'm missing any fields, it'll tell me that they're missing, and I can drag and drop the fields in here as I need to. So very easy to change these things. And then it's easy to edit the fields here as well. So I added one to this where I'm going to say the military branch is dependent on the military field. So this is number 52. Real quickly, I'm going to go back to the portal and find this New Mexico sample application that we're looking at here. On the sample criteria page, I set this one up to say, is anyone in your immediate family, in your immediate family members, an active member of the military? And if we say yes, then we get this question conditionally pop up here. Please select the appropriate military branch, right? If we say no, that question goes away. So the way we did that was pretty straightforward. This is the military branch dropdown. And so I'm just going to go here and edit this. And this is where we set up all the options for this particular field. So this is the military branch field. It's based on a characteristic called military branch that I had to create in Foundation Cloud. It's a drop-down list, etc. And in its conditions, I say you can configure this field to only appear when a certain condition is met. And that's when the military field equals yes. And it was just that straightforward. That'll make that condition, that'll make that field conditional there. And then let's take a look at the last page here with the sample financials. This page is where we had this calculated field, where this is basically the required fees minus the parent's contribution minus the student aid to give us this total required. So if we edit this total required field, it's pretty straightforward. This calculation option is really only available on numeric fields. But what we're saying is take the required college fees and then the operator is minus. So we subtract the parent contributions, and then we subtract the student financial aid to get us the result there. If we needed to do something more complex, we can open parentheses, open double parentheses, and make it way more complicated if we want to, but this is a pretty straightforward version. And just to make sure that I've set up something that makes sense, there's a button here that says test, and it says this calculation is valid. So we're good to go there. Amy, have there been any questions that have come in? I know we're coming up on the end of the hour here.
We have two.
Okay.
And they're more conceptual. Our scholarship program has over 200 funds. What might be a time frame for building criteria for that large of a portfolio? And
Great
obviously
question.
they do know it's impacted by the number of factors, but what have you seen in the past?
That's a great question. I haven't been involved in very many implementations of that scale. For 200 funds, I guess it depends on how complicated they are. If they're not the sort of really complicated nested ones like I was discussing before, where if it's a female applicant and the GPA is greater than 4.5, or if the GPA is greater than 3.5 and they're an engineering major, and whatever. If it's one of those complicated ones, those could take a long time. If it's more straightforward than that, though, just 2 or 3 fields, those can typically be set up per fund in 5 or 10 minutes each if they're pretty straightforward. And then there's the like I said, there's the tool in the settings menu that lets you go in and calculate or test those calculations and make sure they work properly. So depending on complexity, it could take anywhere from 10 minutes to half an hour per fund. And there's if you've got 200 funds, I'll let you do the math, but that could be a pretty significant project to go set all those up. I didn't mention it before, but if a scholarship fund doesn't really have any criteria, if it's open, you can make it available in matching and just not set any criteria. And in that case, every applicant will be matched to that scholarship fund.
Great, thank you. Also, are you going to have a chance to go through scoring today?
Great question. No, unfortunately, no. I can show you, just real quickly show you. This is per field, how we set up the scoring. We can set up scoring to be numeric, where the reviewers can just choose a number. You can say 1 to 5, 1 to 10. I could make this, rate this 1 to 5, rate the answer to their question that they submitted, rate it on a scale of 1 to 5. I could make it numeric, could provide some instructions for the reviewers, or I could make it text-based. And in this case, I would say something along the lines of a 1 is poor, a 4 is fair, and good, whatever, excellent, right? And then the reviewers would be given a drop down where they would choose, one of these 4 values from a list, and then behind the scenes it would, programmatically score that field appropriately. So as you're configuring your web apps for scoring, certainly just keep in mind, got to decide which fields you want to be reviewed and scored, and then how you want those to work. You can also do it for automatic scoring. If you're going to do automatic scoring, that's done, via a procedure in Foundation Cloud Grants, and we strongly recommend that you do this automatic scoring on characteristic fields, on drop-down lists, right? Because if you do automatic scoring based on an open text field where the student typed in what their preferred college is, someone might type in UT, but you might program it for University of Texas, right? And so we strongly recommend that you do that based on the same sort of text values that you'd put in here, but base that on a characteristic so that they'd match up perfectly. So a little bit of planning you want to do for scoring. Again, this white paper has some information on scoring too. We hope to have a new white paper on scoring coming out relatively soon. We're still looking at our resources for that. But yeah, unfortunately, that's a bit beyond the scope of what we've got time to do today.
Great. And the other one was really just an idea for a forthcoming Let's Talk Solutions, and that's really having a workshop on the options and limits of queries. So thank you for that, Kathy, and we will mark that down as well. That's it for now.
Amy, you want to take back screen sharing?
Yes. We do have, as Jeff mentioned, we do have a couple of resources for you that you can find when we send out this presentation. You'll have these linked directly to the white paper as well as the grant application planning guide that we mentioned. Let's see. We don't have any other questions. Let me quick check. Okay, they will look over the white paper for that scoring information, Jeff. Thank you for that. And we'll watch questions here. If anyone has anything additional, let us know. Well, we still have Jeff right here to answer. We also wanted to talk about our Let's Talk Solutions update. We're going to be moving our Let's Talk Solutions to every other month. And this is to make sure that we have our sessions jam-packed with the best resources and topics possible, and really allowing us, providing you with even greater value. So our next Let's Talk Solution date will be on Wednesday, March 20th. And we are still working on our details. I believe this one is going to be on grant applications as well, Jeff, correct? The March 20th date?
I am so sorry, I was muted. Yes, on the March 20th date, it is going to be on not just scholarship, but grant applications in general.
Application. Great.
We're going to have an here who has done grant writing in the past, and it'll be sort of an Ask Me Anything format. She'll go through some best practices and great questions about, things like what are trends in how do you prompt for gender these days? Did it change since last year, right? Some of those complicated questions. What are good questions to ask in an application? What are bad questions to ask? Better way to phrase things, etc. So she'll talk through some of her best practices, and then it'll be an open Ask Me Anything. She's fantastic. It'll be a great session.
Great. So please mark that on your calendar. And as always, if you have ideas for additional Let's Talk Solutions, please reach out and we'll get that added to our list. Also, please connect with us on LinkedIn. Our link will be right on the slide when you receive a copy of this presentation. So thank you everyone for coming today. I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you all again on March 20th. Thanks so much, Jeff.